This is the approach that I'm taking when it comes to creating and styling tabs in Jetpack Compose. Here is an app about Android devs that has two tabs, Suggestions and Favorites. Let's see how we can create and style these tabs in Jetpack Compose. The standard Compose SDK already has included tabs and tab row composables, so we are going to utilize those. So the selected tab index has to come from somewhere, and the way to do this is to hold it into some sort of state. Now, because we are working with tabs, it's natural to think of the tabs as different pages, so we are going to utilize the pager state for holding the selected tab. In order to use this API, we have to hop on the experimental APIs, and here we should also tell how many pages we are going to have. Now, one thing to notice here is that for the page count, we are supplying a lambda rather than the number itself. So if I go ahead and type the number, it is not going to compile. We have to wrap it into a lambda. This is done for optimization purposes. If you are curious about how this works, comment down below this video and I'm going to explain. Next, we can replace the selected tab index to come from the state itself. Next up, we can start working on adding the tabs. We are gonna have only two tabs, so I'll just hard code them here. The tab by default needs some arguments to pass as to whether it is selected or not, what's gonna happen on click, how it is gonna look like as of the UI, so we have to supply some text. So let's go ahead and apply those. So this first tab is gonna be selected only when the pager state current page is 0. So we are gonna have two. The first one's gonna be 0, the other one's gonna be 1. Next, we have to supply the text for the tab, and the text is also a lambda, so it is not necessarily that we are gonna pass text composable here, but we can pass any other composable, so we can tune the look and feel of the tab as we want. But if you look into our designs, we actually need to provide text, and that's the only thing that we have to have in the tabs. So I'm just gonna go ahead and add text. And finally, we can define what happens when we click on this tab. When we click on this tab, we want to change the page. And the way to do that is by changing the pager state. Now, as we can see here, when we click on this tab, we want to move to the first page because that's what this tab stands for. However, we cannot call this scroll to page from the on click like this. We need to wrap it into a coroutine. Now it works. Next up, we can add the other tab as well. Another notice here is that I am using scroll to page, so then when tapping on the tabs, we are not gonna see any animation. There is an API that we can utilize to see an animation as well, which is animate scroll to page. And I'm gonna replace the same to the first tab as well. Now, as you can imagine, if you have a dynamic tabs, you can make a loop inside the tab row and you can draw as many tabs as you need. And now we can see the tabs how they look like on the right hand side, and they don't look according to our designs. So let's go ahead and fix that. In order to fix the background of the tabs row, we have to supply container color for the tabs row itself. Now we have the correct color for the tabs row, but we don't have the correct color for the text. Let's fix that. Now that looks better. Next, we can look into this divider. If you look into the designs, there is no divider right below the tabs row, but in our design, we are having one. So how do we remove it? By default, the tab row has a divider, so what we have to do is to remove that one. If I open the implementation of the tab row, we can see that the default divider is calling a divider that comes from the Compose SDK. However, we don't want that, so here in our tab row, we are going to supply an empty divider. An empty composable like that will do. As you can see on the right hand side, we fixed it. And lastly, the indicator of the selected tab might not be the color that we want right now. So we have to also fix that one. Now we have the correct color. As we can see, the API is very flexible and it allows us to change the tab indicator the way we want it. The last thing is to define pages so that when we click on these tabs, we are opening the correct page. To do that, we are going to utilize a horizontal pager because the horizontal pager is also working with the same pager state that we are already having defined. However, we want to prevent the user to be able to swipe between the tabs. So we want the user to be able to open different tabs only by tapping. To do that, we have to supply user scroll enabled to false to the horizontal pager. Now that we have defined the horizontal pager, we can define the pages inside. We can start with something as simple as a column that's gonna take the whole space, and then we are gonna just put a message inside just to figure out how it works. Now let's run the application and see it working on the emulator. Nice! We have completed adding the tabs. Now we can focus on the pages themselves.